friends. I'm Shweta Milani. We are conducting this web series for past 3 days, and this is our fourth day of the Ind AS web series. So, in the first 3 days, we have covered majority of the standards which are important for the application of Ind AS and which are practically applicable to majority of the companies. On day one, we covered introduction and the asset-related standards. On day two, we covered related parties, operating segments, and government grants. Yesterday, we covered two of the most important standards, which are leases, which was first time applicable on 31st March 2020. And we also covered deferred taxes, which is again one of the most important standards. Today, we are going to cover financial instruments, the crux of Ind AS or the crux of IFRS. And we are also going to cover business combination standard, that is Ind AS 103. So whenever you refer to Ind AS or whenever you refer to IFRS, the biggest differential standard which comes up is the financial instruments. So today I'm going to cover these financial instruments in a very simplified manner. I'll try my best to simplify the standard to the extent possible. I hope at least the peculiarity of the standard and the points which are applicable to all the companies or majority of the companies are understood by you. The complex transactions or the high level issues, even if they're not understood, it is fine. But at least what is the gist of the standard should be captured and should be captured in your minds. That is, and today we're going to cover Ind AS 103, which is business combinations. Tomorrow's agenda, it is continuation of the business combinations, that is consolidated financial statements and revenue. These are the two standards that we will cover tomorrow. So beginning with financial instruments. Financial instruments, we have three standards under Ind AS: Ind AS 32, Ind AS 109, and Ind AS 107. So Ind AS 32 mainly gives a definition of all the terms used in Ind AS 109. Ind AS 109 gives the parameter or the principles for classification of the financial assets and financial liabilities, and it also gives the measurement requirements. So anything regarding recognition and the accounting is given in 109, and the disclosures are given in Ind AS 107. Previously, there was an old standard under IFRS, which was IAS 39. Again, the US GAAP and the IFRS had a joint committee to set up or to improve this financial instrument standard. And they came up with a new standard in IFRS, which was IFRS 9. Globally, this standard was first time applicable on 1st January 2018. India was the first country to pre-adopt or early adopt this standard. And first time this standard was applicable in India on 31st March 2017, when the Ind AS companies gave their phase one companies gave their first Ind AS financial statements. So even before the entire world adopted this IFRS standard of IFRS 9, we in India had adopted Ind AS 109, Ind AS 32, and Ind AS 107. So today I'll give you today I'll give you every term used under the standard, and we are also going to see practically how these concepts are used. So moving ahead, financial instruments. These terms might appear a bit complex, but for every terminology, we're going to take an example. So example would give you a better idea about what this standard is talking about. Individually, if you go on to read the bare text of the standard, you won't understand anything, and I guarantee you won't understand anything. So we'll begin with financial instruments. Financial instrument is a contract that gives rise to a financial asset of one entity and a financial liability or equity instrument of another entity. A term which has used financial asset, financial liability, and equity instrument. We don't know what is a financial asset, we don't know what is a financial liability, and we don't know what is an equity instrument. So you won't understand this definition at all. Let's move ahead to first understanding what is a financial asset, what is a financial liability, and what is an equity instrument. A financial asset is any asset that is of cash, an equity instrument of another entity, a contractual right, and certain other contracts which are settled in equity instruments. This is a bit complex definition. I'll try to simplify it. A financial asset, the first thing is cash. So anything, cash in hand, cash at bank, any kind of cash or whatever appears in your cash and cash equivalents, by default, it is a financial asset. Second, a equity instrument of another entity. It might be investments in an entity. It might be any kind of shares of that entity. So whatever is the equity instrument of that entity, investments in that entity is by default a financial asset. Third, wherever you have such kind of asset where you have right to receive cash or another financial asset from the entity. So what does it mean? Trade receivables, you have right to receive cash. Then again, your investments in FDs, in your fixed deposits, you have a right to receive cash. So wherever you have a right to receive a cash is a financial asset to the company or any other similar financial asset. So even if you have a right to receive equity instrument of another entity, then also it is a financial asset. So these three, only these three parts, even if you understand what is a financial asset, considering only these three parts, that is cash, an equity instrument of an entity, and right to receive cash, I would give you a guarantee of 90% of the cases that appear in all the companies would be covered by only these three parts of the definition. Rest parts are rarely applicable to any kind of company. Still, I'll explain what it is. But if you only understand what is a financial asset by these three terminologies, it will be very easy for you to understand any company's financial statements and analyze what is a financial asset and what is not a financial asset. To take a practical example, I have the annual report of Praj Industries Limited in front of me. So let's understand caption by caption what is a financial asset and what is not a financial asset. I hope everyone is able to view my screen and I've opened the annual report of Praj Industries Limited. So we'll begin. Property, plant and equipment. Property, plant and equipment, capital work in progress, investment property and intangible assets. All these four categories, you don't have a right to receive cash unless you're into a selling agreement and you have already sold these assets. So you don't have a right, you don't have a present right to receive cash. Today, I cannot say that when you're going to go and sell at that point of time, you'll realize the right to receive cash. But today, you don't have the right to receive cash. So that is why property, plant and equipment, capital work in progress, investment property and intangible assets are not financial assets. These are non-financial assets. We'll go to the next items. Investments. Investments are financial assets as said in the definition. It is an equity instrument of any particular entity, of another entity. Then loans. Loans might include, so we'll also see the schedules for these items so that we'll understand in brief what does this caption cover. So in investments in investments, again you have further categories. Investments in subsidiaries, investment in joint ventures, investment in associates. We'll discuss it later on. I'll tell you what is the peculiarity of this investments also. Then second category you have is investments in mutual funds. So investment in mutual funds is nothing but the equity instruments of any particular entity. So again, it is a financial asset of that particular entity. So here it is a list of mutual funds given in the financial statements or given in the annual report. Next caption is loans. Under loans, they have security deposits. Security deposit is nothing but a present right to receive cash. So it is realizable in cash without any other action to be taken. It is just a period of time which has to expire. So there is no criteria that this security deposit will be realizable after a period of 5 years. Whatever might be the tenure of the lease contract, after that tenure is over, only there is a difference of time. Once that time is lapsed, I have a right to receive the cash. So the difference of time doesn't decide whether you have a right to receive cash or you don't have a right to receive cash. If there is only difference of time, then you have a right to receive cash and accordingly it is a financial asset. Then deposits with banks having original maturity of more than 12 months. Same over here. Once the deposit maturity or once the maturity period is over, you have the present right to receive the cash, and that is why deposit in fixed deposits is also a financial asset. Next item, capital advances, prepaid expenses. Against capital advances, you're never gonna receive cash. You're gonna provide goods to that particular entity. You have received the advance so that you're gonna manufacture out of that advances received from your customer, from your you have paid this advance to your vendors, and you're gonna receive goods against this advance paid. So that is why in return, you're never going to receive the cash. You're going to receive the goods against this advance. That is why it is a non-financial asset, and it won't be covered under the financial instrument standard. Again, prepaid expenses similar. Against prepaid expenses, you're either going to receive services or you're going to receive whatever is your pending obligation to be received. So it is not a financial asset, and it won't be covered either under Ind AS 32 or under 109 or under any standard or under any financial instrument standard. Then you have balances with indirect tax authorities. Please remember, balances with any tax authorities or any statutory authorities are not financial instruments, because these are not contractual in nature, but these are statutory obligations or statutory assets. So anything which is a statutory asset, the definition or the word used in financial asset is a contractual right or a contractual obligation. So it should arise from a contract. Whereas balances with indirect authorities, these asset which is appearing in the annual report is a statutory right to receive the amount. So that is why any statutory right is not a financial asset, and it is not covered under any of the financial instrument standard. So first to identify whether you should apply the principles of financial instruments, you need to first classify whether it is a financial asset or it is a financial liability. If it is neither of the same, then you need not apply this financial instrument standard to that caption, and it will be governed by normal principles of assets and liabilities. Neither disclosures, accounting requirements, classification requirements, nothing will be applicable to such items. We'll go to the next item, that is inventories. Unless you sell this inventory, you won't get a right to receive cash, and accordingly, it is again not a financial instrument as of now. That is why it is governed by Ind AS 2 and not by the financial instrument standard. Trade receivables. Trade receivables is a financial asset. After the lapse of time, you're going to receive the money against it. Cash and cash equivalents, other bank balances, by default, these are financial assets. So in this manner, the majority of the items that appears in any annual report or in any financial statements can be easily classified between financial assets and financial liabilities. We'll cover the next definition. I'll get back to this item, what is exchange of financial assets or financial liabilities. First, we'll cover the simpler part so that you get a grip over the standard. Financial liability is any liability that is a contractual obligation to deliver cash or another financial asset to another entity. So if you have a contractual obligation to give cash to that entity, to the person to whom the obligation is arrived for, in that cases it is a financial liability, otherwise it is not a financial liability. So again, let's take example how we took for the financial assets. Your loans and borrowings. Your loans and borrowings are financial liabilities. So let's go by caption by caption. Your borrowings are financial liabilities because you have the obligation to pay the amount in cash. After that, provisions. Provisions also will cover after a point in time. I'll just cover those parts. Trade payables. Trade payables is also a financial liability. Similar logic for the same. And you have employee benefits payables, other payables. So in short, anything which is payable in form of cash or any other financial asset is a financial liability. Now let's cover the complex issues in this classification. In the scope of the standard, it has been said that any part or any item which is covered in Ind AS 37, which is a provision standard, won't fall under the purview of the financial instrument standard. So anything which is provision, even if you're going to pay cash for that item, for example, provision for gratuity, provision for income taxes, provision for any other assessments going on against your company, these are provisions. Once you classify it as a provision, it is governed by Ind AS 37. And anything which is governed by Ind AS 37 is out of the scope of Ind AS 32 and Ind AS 109. So in short, it is out of the scope of financial instruments, and nothing regarding the financial instruments will be applicable to these provisions. So accordingly, for provisions, you won't even assess whether cash is payable or not. You won't assess the definition of financial liabilities, and it is purely covered by Ind AS 37, and it is not under the financial instrument standard. Another part that is skipped out of this annual report is investment in subsidiaries, associates, and joint ventures. So the standard has given two requirements. Under Ind AS 109, you have option. You can measure the investment in subsidiaries, associates, or joint venture. You have two options for the same. The first option is you can measure it at cost as per Ind AS 27, which is standalone financial statements. Second option is you can measure it as per Ind AS 109, which is the financial instrument standard. Once you decide that you will measure these investments at cost, these investments are out of the scope of the financial instrument. So once you decide at cost, it is out of the scope of the standard, and no. Hello. Yeah. So once you decide these investments are within the scope of your measuring it at cost, then these are out of the scope of Ind AS 109, and none of the principles of the financial instrument standard will be applicable. Virag, are you on unmute mode? I'm getting certain disturbances on the line. Hello, Virag. Okay, let's continue irrespective of that. So the thing is, what you need to exclude is anything you measure as per any other standard, it is scoped out of the financial instrument standard. The example for the same was provisions and investment in subsidiaries, associate and joint ventures, which are scoped out of Ind AS 109. Moving ahead to the part of the definition, exchange of financial assets or financial liabilities with another entity under conditions that are potentially favorable or unfavorable. Let's understand the example for the same. For example, you have entered into a forward contract. You have entered into a forward contract with a bank. In case of a forward contract, what is the peculiarity of that contract is you agree to buy certain foreign currency at certain agreed price. So for example, today at 1st of March 2020, I enter into a forward contract with bank to buy the foreign currency, to buy USD at rupees 75. So at 31st March, I will fair value this contract, whether I'm in a favorable position or I'm in an unfavorable position on account of entering into that forward contract. So you will decide, this bank itself give this valuation, you need not do it. So banks provide you a fair valuation as on a reporting date, that what is the position of your forward contract, whether it is in a favorable position or it is in an unfavorable position. If your forward contract is in an unfavorable position, then in that cases it is a financial liability. So it has to be exchanged with another asset and the conditions are potentially unfavorable for the entity, and accordingly it is a financial liability. If it was other way around, if the banks are provided that you are in a favorable position of the forward contract, in those cases it will be your financial asset, since the conditions of that instrument are potentially favorable for the entity, and accordingly it is a financial asset of the entity. So any such kind of derivative instruments, it might be forward contracts, it might be option contracts. So any derivative instruments, if it is in a favorable position, it is a financial asset. If it is in an unfavorable position, then it is a financial liability. So this is about the financial asset and the financial liability. Moving ahead to the next part is we will decide the equity definition, and then we'll come back to this definition, certain contracts settled in entities own equity instruments. So this standard, why it is complex is because it has linking of various terminologies. Unless you understand one particular terminology, you cannot understand what a definition says. So let's go to the equity instrument. Equity instrument is nothing but a residuary interest in the assets or liabilities of the entity. So residuary interest in the net assets of the entity. This is appearing very simple. What are the complex part of this definition? For example, today I'm gonna issue certain shares which are mandatorily convertible. So today I've issued certain debentures, or today I've issued certain instrument which is mandatorily convertible into equity instrument of that entity. If a particular instrument is mandatorily convertible into its own equity shares, in those cases it is by default a equity instrument. If it is mandatorily convertible. If it is not mandatorily convertible and it is redeemable, in that cases it is a financial liability. I'll give you a classic example. Don't go by the technical terminologies. Preference share capital. So preference share capital by default under Indian GAAP, we used to show it under the share capital of the company. Under the share capital, we used to show equity share capital and preference share capital. But under Ind AS, you will decide what are the terminologies, what are the clauses of this instrument, whether it is redeemable, it is not redeemable, whether it is convertible, non-convertible, what are the exact terms of the instrument. If your preference shares is redeemable after a particular point in time, then it is not a equity portion of the company, it is a liability portion of the company. This minor difference has changed the financials of a company to a great extent. It changes your debt equity ratio. It changes how your balance sheet appears itself. Suddenly you're classifying entire thing as a liability. So the preference share capital will be classified as a liability if it is a redeemable preference shares. Other way around, if it was a mandatorily convertible preference shares, in that cases, it is a equity portion of the company. So you will see the conversion terms, you will see the redemption terms. So in Ind AS, classification is not just limited to what terminology you use. Even if you use the terminology of share capital, it might be the capital of the company or it might be liability for the company. So you need to look at the terms of the instruments. Moving ahead to the next part, how to decide whether a particular item is an equity instrument or it is not an equity instrument. So the first thing that we discussed is whether it is redeemable or not redeemable is the thing which decides that whether it is an equity or a liability. Why did we decide a redeemable preference share is a financial liability? Because in the definition of financial liability, it has been said that if you have an obligation to settle anything in cash, since your preferences are redeemable, that is why as on a reporting date, you have an unavoidable obligation to deliver the cash against the preference shares. It's just about the passage of time. Once the tenure of preference share is completed, at that point in time, you have to deliver cash against that preference shares and the obligation is unavoidable. That is why it was classified as financial liabilities. Second thing, this is a bit complex, try to understand. I will divide it into two parts. You have convergent terms. So you have an equity instrument which has convergent terms. So the first part is, it is convertible into fixed number of equity shares. What does it mean? Today I have 100 preference shares which is convertible into exact number of equity shares of the company. It is convertible into 100 equity shares of the company. So 1:1 is the ratio. Today itself I have decided that what is the conversion ratio. So if the conversion ratio is fixed to fixed, you have fixed number of shares for the instrument. In that cases, that entire instrument is an equity instrument. So my first instrument is preference shares, which is convertible and the conversion ratio is fixed. So it is an equity instrument. Second type we'll discuss. For example, I have a preference shares, which is convertible, but how will I decide this conversion ratio? At the date of conversion, whatever is the fair value of the company, according to that fair value of the company, the conversion ratio would be decided. So is the conversion fixed over here? Is the conversion ratio fixed over here? No. So the fixed to fixed test is not getting met. If your fixed to fixed test is not getting met, in that cases, your instrument cannot be classified as an equity instrument. That instrument has to by default be a financial liability of the company. Why is it so? Your value will be decided at the end. So the instrument is going to fluctuate on daily basis. If your fair value of the company is increasing, you have to issue a different number of shares. If the fair value of the company is reducing, you have to issue different number of shares. So the fixed to fixed test is not getting met and it is a financial liability of the company. So this is about the fixed to fixed test. So just to summarize the entire thing in brief. So we'll summarize the entire thing in brief. Financial assets, just look into three parts: whether you have to receive cash, whether you have equity instrument, or whether it is an instrument of any other entity. And the third part is whether you have right to receive cash. So remember only these three things. For the purpose of financial liability, what all can come under financial liability? If you have obligation to pay cash, number one. If it is such kind of derivative instrument where the position is unfavorable for the company. So it might be forwards, options, any kind of derivative instrument which is in an unfavorable position. That is a financial liability. And the third part, which is a financial liability, is if there is a conversion option in any particular equity shares and the fixed to fixed test is not getting met, then it is a financial liability. Under equity, it is a equity share, equity residual interest of the company. And the second part, what can come under equity, is if you have a conversion option in your instrument and the fixed to fixed test is getting met, in that cases, the instrument is a equity instrument. I hope it is clear. If you have any queries, you can note it down and we can discuss it at the end, or I will email the replies to the queries. Moving ahead, there can be cases where you might have obligation to deliver cash also, and you might have conversion terms also. So there is obligation to deliver cash also, or there might be conversion terms also. So what to do in that cases? For example, today I have issued the debentures. Today I have issued debentures which are at the rate of 6%. The investors have the option to convert that debenture shares. It is optionally convertible. It is not in my hand. It is not in the hand of issuer whether the investors are gonna convert or not gonna convert. So for me, whatever investors decide, I have to provide accordingly. If the investors decide, no, I don't wanna convert, I want cash against it, then I have to pay cash against it. If the investors decide I want the conversion, then I have to give the equity shares against it. In that cases, what are such kind of instruments? In that cases, it is a compound financial instrument. So if there is a liability as well as equity component for a particular financial instrument, then it is a compound financial instrument. So in our present case, what is the liability portion? Your interest, your periodic interest is a liability portion, because you cannot deny the obligation of your cash for the interest component. And if the conversion option is not exercised, in that case you have to deliver the cash. So it is again a liability portion. And if it is converted, then it is an equity portion. So it is a compound financial instrument. Accounting of everything, financial asset, financial liability, compound financial instrument, everything is governed by Ind AS 109. Here we are just understanding the terminologies of each and every instrument. So in that cases, if it is a compound financial instrument, then you have to divide the entire instrument into equity component and financial liability component. How to divide this, we are going to understand it ahead. Don't worry about how to do this. But just understand a generic principle that if a particular instrument contains both the component, equity as well as liability, then you have to split both the components between equity component and a liability component. All right. I hope it is clear to you all. Then moving ahead, we'll decide the accounting. We'll come back to these terms regarding accounting later on. Moving ahead, what is additionally provided by the standard is any kind of transaction cost. This is same. This is the normal logic. Any kind of transaction cost regarding the financial liabilities has to be recognized in profit and loss. Any kind of transaction cost regarding equity instrument has to be recognized directly in equity. So this is about the transaction cost. We'll again discuss this in detail when we discuss the examples. We'll see the accounting. So first let's see the accounting and then let's come back to the classification and the offsetting part, because it is a part of the disclosure. So I hope you have understood the basics. What is a financial asset, liability and equity portion, and what is a compound financial instrument. Now going to the classification. If anybody had heard the terminologies of AS 3031, so under AS 3031, you had the financial assets to be classified into 3-4 parts: loans and receivables, held to collect. There were certain terminologies used. If you have read that standard, then please forget entire standard. The terminologies used in Ind AS 109 are completely different than what was used in AS 30 and 31. It is good if you have not heard about the standard. So let's move on to the classification as per the Ind AS 109. Why classification is required? According to your classification, the accounting will be given. So if your classification goes incorrect, your accounting will go incorrect. So that is why it is very important to understand what is your classification. Before understanding the classification, let's understand 2-3 terminologies. For example, I have invested into debentures of a company. Let's understand purely from a part of financial asset right now. Let's discuss financial asset in whole currently, and after that we will discuss financial liabilities. So purely your mindset will be from a asset point of view. So beginning with the first example is, I have invested into the debentures of a company. What is my objective? My objective is first to receive interest against that debentures. Second is after completion of the tenure, I have to receive the principal component. So why have I invested in that debentures is, first is to collect the interest and second is to collect the principal portion. So this is my first type of instrument. Second, I have invested into the debentures of a company where the company is giving interest and will give the principal portion at the end. But I, as a company, I will not wait till the end. If the market scenarios are good, I will sell these debentures between the tenure. So I might wait till end or I might not wait till end. It depends upon, it is purely my investment strategy, whether I will wait till end or I will not wait till end. These are the 2 types of investments. So in the first case, I'm purely going to wait till the end of the tenure, collect the entire interest portion, collect entire principal portion at the end. In the second, I will collect interest and I might sell the debentures in between of the tenure. So what to do in that cases? What are these 2 things? There are 2 concepts of solely for the purpose. We'll discuss it. We'll discuss it with the slide decks, so it will be better to understand. So solely the payments are for the principal and interest, and the second concept is hold to collect. So understand these 2 concepts in detail. If a particular instrument is in the nature of giving interest and giving the principal portion, so it is purely giving you cash flows during the tenure of that instrument. So it is called as SPPI test in the standard. What is that? Solely for the payment of principal and interest. Interest might be at a fair market rate, at a lower market rate. Don't go with whether the interest rate is fair or not. Forget that. Interest might be 0% also. But what is the nature of that instrument is, it will purely give you cash flows. It might give you cash flows in what form? Either in the form of interest or in the form of principal repayment. We'll discuss examples. Understand and be very much focused for these 2 concepts. It will govern entire classification. Example number 1 is my debentures example. What is that? I'm solely holding that instrument for the purpose of interest and for the purpose of the principal repayment. Second example is security deposit. So your lease security deposit, what is that? I'm at the end of the period of my lease term, I'm gonna receive the entire cash of my security deposit. Is there anything involved in this instrument? No, nothing is involved in this instrument. At the end, I'm purely gonna receive entire cash. Even if it is 0% interest, forget the rate of interest. But purely it is for purpose of payment of the principal component or interest component or both the components. Third example, I have a loan with my related party. My related party is giving me interest of only 6%. So what is my purpose of the instrument is collecting 6% interest and collecting the principal component. So even in this case, your SPPI test solely for the purpose of payment of principal and interest is getting met. There is no other clause, there is no other term in this instrument. So I've covered three examples where in the first example, the interest rate was at a fair market rate. In the second example, there was a zero interest rate. In the third example, it was a lower than market interest rate. So all these three cases are getting, in all these three cases, the SPPI test is getting met, which is solely for the purpose of payment of principal and interest. Second example is, for example, I have invested in a debentures. The interest rate provided in the debentures is 6%, which is lower than the market rate. Why it is lower than the market rate is because I have a conversion option in that debentures. At the end of the tenure or after a certain period, I can exercise my option and I can convert it into the equity shares of the company. So what are the things involved over here? First is I will receive the interest. Second is I will receive the principal component if I do not convert. If I convert, I will receive the equity shares of the company. So in this case, because there is a conversion option, the SPPI test is not getting met. If there was no conversion option, then SPPI test would have got met because only purpose of the instrument is your interest and the principal component. But here it is not the case. Conversion option is also there, and because of this conversion option, the SPPI test is not getting met. Second terminology. I hope this SPPI test concept is clear. Second terminology is hold to collect. This terminology is simpler. If you're gonna wait till the maturity of the instrument, then hold to collect test is getting satisfied. If you're not gonna wait till the maturity of the instrument, then hold to collect test is not getting satisfied. In the first example that we discussed, in the first case, I will wait till the completion of tenure of the debentures and I will realize the principal portion. So in this case, the hold to collect test is getting met. Whereas in my second case, I was going to sell the debenture in between of the tenure of the debenture, and that is why hold to collect test is not getting met. Now you will say how to decide whether I'm going to wait till end, I'm not going to wait till end. It purely depends upon the business model of the company. With what intent the company had invested into the instruments and what is the past practice of the company. So this is about it. Now will you say, why did we discuss these two concepts so much? Why did we discuss what is SPPI test? Why did we discuss what is a held to collect test? This we discussed because your entire classification is governed based on these two concepts. So let's discuss this concept. If your instrument, for your instrument, both the tests are getting satisfied, SPPI test is also getting satisfied and your held to collect test is also getting satisfied. If both these tests are getting satisfied, then the instrument is to be classified as amortized cost. It has to be classified under amortized cost. Okay, we'll also discuss the flowcharts also, we'll discuss the examples also, but your instrument is under the amortized cost. Second, if your SPPI test is getting met, but your held to collect test is not getting met, then the instrument has to be classified as fair value through other comprehensive income. Just understand the classification now. the accounting or how to measure these classifications or what will happen. What do you mean by FVT OCI? That we will discuss ahead. So if your instrument amortized cost is getting met, if your both the conditions are getting met, it is amortized cost. If only SPPI test is getting met and held to collect is not getting met, then it is FVT OCI. If your SPPI test itself is not getting met, then it is a fair value through P&L classification. Let's discuss it by way of flowchart also. Are the assets, and understand by default any equity instrument, if it is an equity of a company, your SPPI test is not getting met. Under equity, you never have interest component. Under equity, you never have the principal component. So if it is an equity instrument, by default, remember that it will never fall under amortized cost also. It will never fall under the fair value through OCI also. So let's discuss the flow chart. Are the assets contractual cash flow solely? Is the SPPI test getting met? If it is yes, check whether the held to collect test is getting met. If both these tests are getting met, then it is a amortized cost classification. If SPPI test is itself not getting met, then by default it is a fair value through P&L classification. If SPPI test is met, but your held to collect test is not getting met, then it is a FVT OCI classification. If even held to collect is not getting met, then it is a fair value through P&L. So understand these classifications. Will again go for an example. We had discussed the annual report of Praj Industries Limited. We had decided what is a financial asset and what is a financial liability. Now we will again discuss what is the classification of these financial assets and financial liabilities. So first instrument is the mutual funds. So in case of mutual funds, tell me, are you ever gonna receive interest or principal portion? No, you're gonna never receive interest or principal portion. And by default, mutual funds is in a nature of equity instrument. So by default, mutual funds will never satisfy the SPPI test. And since it is not satisfying the SPPI test, by default, it is fair value through P&L classification. Next. Investments, unquoted investments, deposit with Bajaj Finance Limited. Now it is a deposit. It is a deposit. You're gonna receive interest. You're gonna receive your principal portion. So your SPPI test is getting met. You're gonna wait till end of the tenure. That is why even your hold to collect is getting met. And that is why, since both the conditions are getting met, it is amortized cost. Next, security deposit. We discussed it. Both the conditions are getting met. It is a amortized cost classification. And remember, you don't have options. If all the conditions are getting met, you have to classify it as amortized cost. Accounting, we will discuss. What difference does it make if it is an amortized cost or FVTPL or FVTOCI? That we will discuss. But just understand the classification at the beginning. If your classification is correct, your accounting has to be correct. Next example. Trade receivables. Even in case of trade receivables, you're gonna receive the principal component at the end. There is no question of interest, and even the trade receivable is classified under amortized cost. Deposit with banks, FDs, let us fix deposits. You are gonna receive interest, you are gonna receive principal. Both the conditions are getting met, and it is a amortized cost classification. I hope you have understood the cases where it will be amortized cost, where it will be FVTPL, and where it will be FVTOCI. So FVTOCI is a bit rare in nature, but amortized cost and FVTPL, fair value through P&L classification, is the cases where you have majority of such cases. So going back to our original slide deck, if you have any queries, these concepts are a bit difficult to digest, I agree. But if you read it once and twice, then you will be habituated to what is amortized cost, what is FVTPL, and what is FVTOCI. Moving ahead, equity instruments. Equity instruments by default. Let's discuss this slide deck. Just a minute, I'll go to the relevant slide deck. Equity instruments by default have only will never go under the amortized cost criteria. Okay, be clear about it. Equity instruments will always be fair value through P&L, but the standard has given an option to the company that if your equity instruments are not held for the purpose of trading, you're not into the day-to-day trading of the companies, in that cases you have an option that you can classify it under fair value through other comprehensive income. What is the logic? If you're not into the day-to-day trading of the company, why should you impact your P&L on a day-to-day basis? That is why it is purely an option with the company that you can classify it under FVT OCI, fair value through other comprehensive income. And this option is available on individual equity and individual instrument basis. So if you have 10 shares, 10 equity instrument, you can decide on instrument by instrument basis whether you want to take this option or you don't want to take this option. So it is purely in the hands of the company. If you're not taking this option of fair value for other comprehensive income, then by default it is a FVTPL classification, fair value through profit and loss classification. Now you would say we understood everything. We understood amortized cost, we understood FVTPL, we understood equity OCI. But what difference does it make if the classification is changed? What difference does it make in all the 3-4 criteria? Why to decide appropriate classification? How will it impact the accounting? So we'll discuss first. You will understand all the concepts in detail. So understand the basic fundamental that in financial instruments, each and every financial instrument has to be recognized at fair value on initial recognition. So previously we discussed property, plant and equipment, investment property, intangible assets. Nowhere it was said that at initial recognition, the financial instrument should be measured at fair value. Whereas in financial instrument standard, it is mandatory that each and every instrument should be measured at fair value. So how to do that? It depends upon your classification. We'll take for an example. First, we'll take the example and then we'll discuss. Example number 1. We have discussed this in multiple cases also. I have debentures in a company. I have debentures of rupees. So I have debentures in a company which is of rupees 1 lakh. The rate of interest, or let's go to a simpler example. Yesterday, so just a minute. Yesterday we discussed the investment or the government loans, whoever were there on day 2. So even government loans we discussed. So wherever there were government loans, in that cases, what did we do? Whoever were there on day 2, we discounted the government loan. The government loan was not at fair market rate of interest. We discounted that government loan to present value and we recognized the entire government loan at present value. So similar is the case over here. So here I have an instrument which is debentures is issued at 1 lakh rupees. The rate of interest on the debentures is 5%. The rate of interest is 5% and the debentures are issued at 1 lakh. In that case, the fair value of debentures as on the reporting date will not be equal to my book value. So fair value is not equal to 1 lakh. In that cases, what will we do? We will discount the debentures to present value. We will discount it to present value and that will be the value at which you will recognize the debentures. So you have discounted the debentures using the incremental borrowing rate of the company and the present value has been arrived at 81,000. This concept was discussed in detail during the day 2. So that is why whoever are present on day 2, you will get better grip on this concept. So if you have an instrument against which the rate of interest is not equal to the market rate, in that cases your fair value as on the reporting date will be different than the book value of the debentures. So in our case, the book value has come up to 81,000 and the fair value is, the book value was 1 lakh. So you have to recognize the debentures at 81,000. So this is the difference between the book value and the fair value. In financial instruments, each and every instrument has to be recognized at fair value by default. That is the case over here. Then moving ahead to what are the accounting for, what is the difference of each accounting methodology. We'll discuss the first method, that is amortized cost. In amortized cost, what do you do? In fair value through P&L, what do you do? In fair value through other comprehensive income, what do you do? We'll take the simpler one first. In fair value through P&L, as the name suggests, in fair value through P&L, all the differences between the fair value has to be transferred to your profit and loss account. I have invested into the mutual funds of the company. Mutual funds are into the FVTPL category. And since it is an FVTPL category, at every reporting date, I will fair value the mutual funds. So let's take an example. At the first case, I hope you are able to see my Excel sheet. So example for mutual funds. So on day one, I had purchased the mutual funds at rupees 100, at rupees 1000. Let's take for an example. At the reporting date, so 31st March 2020, the fair value of mutual funds was 1200. So in that cases, I will recognize the gain in my profit and loss, and the accounting entry will be mutual funds account debit to profit and loss to gain on mutual funds, which will be recognized in profit and loss. So very simple. At every reporting date, you will fair value it, and the fair value will be transferred to your profit and loss account. Second, fair value through other comprehensive income. This is also same, everything is same. What is the difference is, instead of transferring the fair value to the P&L, you are transferring the fair value to the other comprehensive income. So we discussed the statement of other comprehensive income yesterday also. I had shown you a live example of other comprehensive income. So it is nothing but your gains will be transferred, will be routed through other comprehensive income. Okay, these two criteria are very simple, FVT OCI and FVT PL. Now we will understand the amortized cost criteria, which is a bit difficult to understand. Now understand, if you have a borrowing, you have a loan, and your loan is taken from a bank. If the loan is taken from the bank, you have been charged with a rate of interest of 10%, 11%, whatever it is. In cases, if it is 10 or 11%, even if you will compute the present value of the interest and the principal portion, it will be equal to the book value of a loan. Today I have taken 1 lakh rupees from a bank. The bank is going to charge me 11% rate of interest every year. Now, if I discount the interest and if I discount the principal portion using 11% rate of interest itself, it has to be 1 lakh. So in short, your book value as well as the fair value of the instrument is same, correct? So in this cases, the borrowings or your loan from the bank are measured at amortized cost. It is measured at amortized cost. You're present valuing that loan to present value, but it is not making any difference because your loan is at a fair market rate of interest. Okay. Now take another example where the loan is not at a market, at a fair market rate of interest. In a present case, there is a debentures issued by the company. The debentures are issued to a related party. And since they are issued to a related party, they are only paying 5% rate of interest. In that cases, tell me whether the fair value and the book value will be the same. No, your market rate of interest is 11% and your current rate of interest is 5% that you're charging. If we'll discount these cash flows, so we'll discount this 5,000, 5,000, 1 lakh, 5,000 using the fair market rate of interest, which is 10%, the fair value will not be equal to book value, and that is why it makes a difference. So remember, under amortized cost, it will make a difference only if the rate of interest given on that instrument is not equal to the market value of that instrument, is not equal to the market rate applicable to that instrument. Now you will say how to decide market rate for each and every instrument. So simple, as we have discussed in past 3 days also, you will compare your incremental borrowing rate and then you will decide whether it is at a fair market rate or not. If you would have gone outside to a bank Will you get that debentures at rupees 6 at 5% or 6% rate of interest? No. So that is why this instrument is not at fair value and it has to be discounted to present value and recognized in your books of accounts at the discounted value. I hope it is clear what the amortized cost is. So amortized cost in simple terms, it is nothing but the present value of the cash flows discounted at your incremental borrowing rate. That is what the amortized accounting for amortized cost is, or that is how you recognize the instrument at the amortized cost. Let's discuss few more examples. We'll go back to our original classification test. So for financial liabilities, you have only two classifications, that is amortized cost and fair value through P&L. Same what we discussed, if SPPI test is not getting met, then it is fair value through P&L, and if it is both the tests are getting met, then it is amortized cost. So in our cases, loans, borrowings, loans to related parties, security deposits, your lease deposits, everything will come under amortized cost. Your derivative instruments, your forward contracts, your option contracts, your convertible instruments will fall under the FVTPL criteria, financial fair value through profit and loss criteria. And the accounting is also, your initial recognition is also been understood. Under amortized cost, you're just going to do the discounting of the cash flows, and under FVTPL fair value through profit and loss, at each reporting date, you're going to fair value the instruments. Now let's go into the further details. Any reclassification from FVTPL to amortized cost is not permitted, is never permitted. Only if you significantly change the entire instrument, entire terms of the instrument, it goes under the modification and such detailed steps will be applicable. But easily, today you say it is amortized cost, tomorrow it is FVTPL, it will never happen under the standard. Now, this SPP, everything we have discussed. Now you will say that how to decide, as we have discussed already, how to decide what is held to collect, and it depends upon the risk management of the entity and how the entity is managing its investment portfolio. Another example is of trade receivables. Even in trade receivables, as we discussed, held to collect is also getting met and SPPI is also getting met. So that is why it falls under the amortized cost criteria. Now let's discuss one more principle is, if any particular financial asset is short-term in nature, then the present value of that instrument will not make a material difference. The standard has given an exemption that if any particular assets or liabilities are short-term in nature, they are lesser than 12 months, then you might not discount such financial instruments, and the book value shall itself be the fair value of that instrument. So to summarize, if any particular financial asset or a liability is current in nature, you don't have to do any accounting. Whatever is the book value of that instrument, itself will be the fair value of that instrument, and at that value itself you will recognize in your books of accounts. Equity instruments we discussed. Measurement also, at initial recognition and subsequent recognition also we discussed. Moving ahead to the next example. Today you have a borrowing. Let's discuss it with example itself. This is my debentures or loan from the bank. I hope you can see my Excel sheet. We have a loan from bank at 11% rate of interest. If you would have incurred any transaction cost on this, so I have incurred a transaction cost on this loan. This transaction cost is rupees 10,000. If you have incurred a transaction cost on this loan, what we used to do under Indian GAAP, we used to debit this transaction cost in your P&L on day one itself. In the year in which you incur the transaction cost, in that year itself, it was transferred to your statement of profit and loss. But in this Ind AS scenario, this loan is getting classified as amortized cost. And since the loan is getting transferred at classified at amortized cost, this transaction cost will be debited to your loan account itself. It will be debited to your loan account itself. So now what will happen? Since the amount has been debited to your loan account itself, your interest is not really 11%, it is above 11%. It might be 11.25, it might be 11.3%. You will compute the internal rate of return for the purpose of accounting on this transaction cost, or for the purpose of accounting for this loan transactions. So the transaction cost is not debited to P&L, but it is debited to the loan account. So under amortized cost, you never debit the transaction cost to your statement of profit and loss. Moving ahead to the subsequent measurement. Under subsequent measurement, what does it happen? As we discussed fair value through P&L and fair value through OCI, any changes in the fair value will be transferred either to the P&L or to the other comprehensive income. Now what happens in amortized cost? Under amortized cost, the interest will be debited to your statement of profit and loss. So let's discuss with the example. So in a present case, the interest will be debited to your profit and loss at the fair market rate of interest. So even though the borrowings were at 5%, in spite of that, the interest will be debited to your statement of profit and loss at the fair market rate of interest, which will be the finance cost for the company. Let's discuss this example in detailed manner. So you will debit your finance cost. We discussed this example even in case of government loans. The government loans was given at 2%, but your finance cost was getting debited at 11%, which was the fair market rate of interest. Similarly, here even under amortized cost, you will debit your P&L at the fair market rate of interest. Now, let's go to the accounting of a compound financial instrument. So what happens in case of a compound financial instrument? Can you see my Excel sheet for the purpose of the example? You have a debentures with interest rate of 5%. Why the interest rate is 5% is because you have a conversion option after the period of 5 years. Now you have a conversion option after the period of 5 years. In that cases, the instrument is having equity component as well as it is having a liability component. All right. It is a compound financial instruments. How to account for this instrument? If you need to account for a compound financial instrument, you need to first measure the liability component. Once you measure the liability component, the residuary part is the equity component. How will you measure the liability component? Liability component will be the present value of the cash flows discounted at the market rate or your incremental borrowing rate. Market rate is nothing but the incremental borrowing rate. So whatever is the incremental borrowing rate, you can see in the present case, the interest rate is 5%, but I've discounted at the incremental borrowing rate of 10%. So the present value is 81,000. So in my case, the financial liability is to be measured at 81,000 and the balance component is the equity component. So in short, the conversion option in this instrument has been assigned the value of 18,000, which is the balance component. So your total value of the instrument is 1 lakh. Out of that, the liability component is 81,000 and the equity component is 19,000. So the entire instrument is split into two parts, that is the liability component and the equity component. What will happen in the future years? In the future years, the equity component will stay as it is in your financial statements. It will stay as it is forever. So it will stay as it is in your financial statements. And what will happen to the liability component? There will be unwinding of discount. This unwinding of discount terminology we have been using from day 1 to the day 3 till yesterday. We are understanding this unwinding of discount. What is unwinding of discount? It is nothing but whatever your present value, you have to future value on year basis, and the interest will be charged to your profit and loss account based on your current market rate, that was 10%. So interest will be debited to your profit and loss at the rate 10%. Okay, so you will debit your interest with 43,000 will be debited to your finance cost account. Please remember your unwinding of discount table should always be 0 at the end, and that is how you will account for the interest. So how does your balance sheet look like? There is an equity component. Finance cost has been debited at fair value. You have accounted as if the instrument didn't have a conversion option. If the instrument didn't have a conversion option, what would be the interest that would have been debited to the profit and loss? So the interest that would be debited to profit and loss will be at 10%. I hope this example is clear, and we have discussed this unwinding in various cases. We're discussing leases also, we're discussing government grants also. It is the third or the fourth time that we are discussing the unwinding of discount concept. So this is about the amortized cost. Let's go into the further detail. Here, the interest rate was 5% because there is a conversion option. Let's go to another example. We have a subsidiary. Holding company has given loan to the subsidiary company, and since it is its own subsidiary company, it is its own child, that is why they have given it at 5% rate of interest. So concession is not because there is a conversion option. Concession is because it is its subsidiary company. In that cases, what to do? In that cases, what will be the accounting treatment? If I am the holding company and you are doing the accounting in my books, whatever was the difference of 19,000 will be debited to investment in subsidiary. So here there is no conversion option, so there is no question arising. So your loan will still appear at fair value, which is 81,000, and your difference will be transferred to investment in subsidiary account, and the loan is measured at amortized cost. What will happen in the books of the subsidiary company? In the books of the subsidiary company, the loan will be recognized at fair value by default. In financial instrument, keep a principal rule in your mind. Any financial instrument at fair value. So the loan will be recognized in the books of subsidiary company at the fair value of 81,000, and the difference will be debited to securities premium account. That is nothing but your additional contribution received from the holding company. Why is holding company giving you loan at a concessional rate? Because they want you to perform well, and if the subsidiary company will perform well, eventually the holding company will get the benefits. That is why the difference has to be transferred to the securities premium account. This issue is one of the issues that has been mentioned in the ITFG, and that is where we have taken the example of this ITFG accounting. So moving ahead to the next part of the standard. Amortized cost we have discussed, that is the effective interest rate of accounting, the method of using effective interest rate, and the financial liabilities division also we have discussed. It is amortized cost and FVTPL. Only these two criteria, only these two accounting treatments are available for the purpose of financial liabilities. So we have discussed everything. We have discussed the classification. So you have 3 classifications for assets and only 2 classifications for the liabilities. We have discussed the accounting. Accounting, if once you classify it at fair value, the accounting is pretty simple, whereas the accounting for amortized cost is a bit complex. Then moving ahead, we have also discussed where all will the differences be transferred. The difference, so in case of amortized cost, the accounting is same, but the difference where it will be transferred depends upon what is the reason for such concessional rate. So if the reason is holding to subsidiary, in that case the accounting will be different. If the reason is a conversion option, then the accounting will be different. That is, the account head will be different. But the measure of computation will be the same in both the cases. One more concept which I want to discuss in short, that is the expected credit loss model. Because this model will be used by you frequently and you would have heard in various financial statements also. What is the expected credit loss model? You would remember you used to do provisioning of data or provisioning of any kind of receivables. Similar is the expected credit loss model. Expected credit loss model is nothing but a manner of computing impairment of the financial assets. So now you have various receivables. You have trade receivables, you have security deposits, you have various receivables in your books. How to do the provisioning for the same is governed by the expected credit loss model. So to simplify in very simple terms, in standard, you will see hundreds of pages on this expected credit loss model. But to simplify it, expected credit loss model is nothing but you provide for on your data based on a past trend. You bucket the trade receivables. You divide it into 3-4 criteria. Receivable within 0 days. 0 to 100 days, 100 to 200 days, 200 to 365 days. And based on the past trend, you will give a rate at which this data should be provisioned for. So at what rate should you give, at what rate should you allow impairment on this trade receivables? But the difference over here is, even in case of 0 days outstanding data, that is, only you have made, there is 0 number of days outstanding. Even in those cases, you have to make provisioning on the data. Why so? Because the company has a past trend that even if the data was outstanding for 0 days, even if the 0 days were not passed out of the credit period, even in that cases, the impairment would have arrived. So in past cases, the such data also were bad dates for the companies. So even for such data also you will make provision in the books of accounts. And in that case, it is not called as provision for doubtful debts, but it is called as expected credit loss on the trade receivables. All right, I hope it is clear. Expected credit loss model is clear to you all. So under financial instruments, there are various other complex concepts also. But for your day-to-day understanding of your financial instruments and the companies, majority of the companies, these all concepts will be very much useful, and it is sufficient for you to understand the concepts and apply the concepts of financial instruments. So in my past conversion, I have made almost 20-30 conversions of huge listed companies. Rarely the other concepts such as put options, call options, fair valuing of such options, and then the other complex concepts such as conversion where fixed to fixed test is not getting met. Rarely it used to come into the picture. Hardly in one of the companies we had seen such kind of contracts, because these contracts are not of peculiar nature or not of repetitive nature. But in majority of the companies, we have seen the accounting, whatever we have discussed. But whereas these accountings also require certain attention, and which is given the special guidance under the financial instrument standard. So I hope everything is clear, and we have discussed everything about the financial instrument. Let's move on to the another important standard, that is business combination. So today we will discuss Ind AS 103